Ever feel like your code's about to collapse in on itself? Like one wrong move and it's game over.
Yeah, I've been there too many times.
Well, today we're diving into a design pattern that can help. It's like the blueprint for wrangling complexity and building software that's actually, elegant, maintainable.
Elegant code, that's the
Yeah, all
dream.
right. So we're talking about the composite design pattern, and we've got some really cool excerpts from this C++ presentation that really breaks it down.
It's a good one. It gets to the heart of why this pattern is so powerful, so useful. You ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's do it. So, composite design pattern, what problem does it actually solve? Give me the lay of the land.
Okay, so picture this. You're building an online store. Great.
Got it. Familiar territory.
You've got individual products, tons of them. Then you've got categories like electronics, clothing, that kind of thing. And then maybe even subcategories within those categories.
Right, right. Getting complex already.
Exactly. And now imagine trying to manage all of that separately in your code. Talk about a nightmare.
Oh, yeah. The stuff of coding horror stories.
Exactly. So the composite pattern swoops in with a really elegant solution, a tree-like structure.
A tree, like branches and leaves and all that.
Yeah, exactly. But instead of oaks and maples, we've got code. So at the top, you've got this thing called a component. And a component can be one of two things. It can be a single, independent element. We call that a leaf.
Okay, so a leaf is like the simplest unit.
Exactly. Like think of a single product in your online store. That's a leaf. Or a component can be a composite.
Okay, so what makes a composite different?
A composite is like a container. It holds other things. So in our online store example, a category like electronics, that would be a composite because it holds all the individual product leaves, right?
I'm starting to see the tree structure here. You've got the branches, the composites, and the leaves, the individual items.
Exactly. And the really cool thing about the composite pattern is whether you're dealing with a single leaf or a composite full of other stuff, the code treats them the same way.
Really? So I can interact with a single product the same way I interact with a whole category.
Exactly. And that might sound a little counterintuitive at first, but it actually makes things so much simpler.
How so?
Well, think about adding a new product to your online store. With the composite pattern, you don't need to write different code for adding a single product versus like a whole new category with a bunch of subcategories. Use the same methods, the same functions for both.
So it's like having one master key that unlocks every door.
Exactly. And that makes your code so much cleaner, so much easier to maintain. And it's not just about adding stuff. Removing things becomes a breeze too, because you're working within this consistent tree structure. Delete a single product, delete a whole category. Same process.
It's like instead of having this tangled mess of code, you've got this neatly organized file system.
That's a great analogy. And
Mhm.
speaking of organization, let's actually look at how this plays out in some real code. Our source material has this C++ example.
Yeah, let's get down to brass tacks here. Show me the goods.
Now, we won't get too deep into the weeds here, but there's this one part that I find particularly interesting. There's this method called operation.
Okay, operation. What's so special about it?
Well, you see operation in both the leaf and composite elements, but the way it behaves, it changes depending on which one you're dealing with.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
So in a leaf element, let's say our leaf is that single product, right, like a hammer, the operation method. It performs a specific action that's directly related to that hammer. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally.
But in a composite element, operation acts more like a delegator.
The delegator.
Yeah, so it takes that operation call and it passes it down to all of its children, whether those children are individual leaves or other composites.
So it's like a chain of command.
Exactly. The composite says, hey, we need to perform this operation,
Yeah.
and each element under its command knows exactly what to do.
That's so clever. I love it. So we've talked about online stores, but I have a feeling this pattern pops up in a lot of other places too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Online stores are just one example. Think about a computer's file system.
Okay, yeah. Files and folders, right?
Exactly. You've got your individual files, those are your leaves.
Yeah.
And then you've got directories or folders, like you said.
Hmm.
And those act as composites that hold the files.
Yeah.
Or even other directories.
Right, right. So it's the same pattern again, individual things and then containers for those things.
Exactly. And that structure, it's what allows the operating system to actually make sense of everything, to navigate it, manipulate it, display it in a way that both the computer and the user can understand.
So it's bringing order to what could be like utter chaos.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And speaking of order, remember those organizational charts we were talking about?
Yeah, and big companies?
The composite pattern, perfect for representing that kind of structure too.
How so?
Well, you can think of each employee as a leaf,
Okay.
and then each department, that becomes your composite.
Right, I see.
Yeah. And that helps you manage all those relationships, reporting structures, communication flows, even things like assigning tasks, tracking performance. It all becomes much more organized, much easier to manage.
So it's like that operation method we talked about earlier, but at a higher level, right?
Exactly. It's all connected. And that's what I love about this stuff. It's not just about knowing this one specific pattern. It's about developing a way of thinking, a mental model for tackling complexity.
It's like instead of just being a coder, you become like an architect of code.
Yes, exactly. And that's what sets apart the good developers from the great ones. Recognizing these patterns, these elegant solutions to these common problems, that's how you write code that's not just functional, but beautiful.
It's like the difference between building a house and like crafting a work of art.
I love that analogy. And speaking of practical applications, our source material actually has this cool little challenge for anyone who wants to really get their hands dirty with the composite pattern.
Oh, it's a challenge. I like it. What is it?
They suggest trying to build like a simplified file system, just as an exercise.
Okay, so you'd use the leaf and composite structures to represent the files and directories.
Exactly.
And then you'd have to figure out how to implement the operation method for all the different things you'd want to do in a file system.
Exactly. And in doing that, you start to really internalize the power of this pattern. It's not just some abstract concept anymore. It becomes this really practical tool you can use to build better, more organized software.
And isn't that the dream? Software that's not just functional, but also like a joy to work with?
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot where functionality meets elegance. And the composite pattern, I think it gives us this really powerful way to do that. It makes you wonder, though all this talk about trees and hierarchies and stuff, it's like maybe we're already using these principles in our everyday lives without even realizing it.
Ooh, now you've got me thinking. What do you mean? Give me an example. How are we already living the composite pattern? Well, just think about like how we organize our lives in general.
Okay, yeah.
We take big tasks and we break them down into smaller steps.
Right.
Right?
Got to make it manageable.
Exactly. So each of those steps, that's like a leaf, and then you group related steps together. Those become your composites.
Yeah.
And eventually it all builds up to like the overall project, the big component.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. So, like, if I'm looking at my to-do list,
Yes, perfect example.
each individual item, that's a leaf. But then I've got them grouped into categories like work, personal, errands, whatever.
Yeah.
So those categories, those are like my composites.
Exactly. You've got it.
And the whole to-do list, that's the overarching component.
Nailed it. Or even something like managing your finances.
Okay, yeah.
Every individual transaction, that's a leaf, right? But you group those transactions into categories: groceries, entertainment, bills.
Right. Makes it much easier to track where your money's going. Exactly. It's all about creating these hierarchies, these structures that make complex information easier to understand and manage.
It's like this pattern, this composite pattern. It's not just some abstract computer science thing. It's like a reflection of how our brains naturally organize information.
Right. And once you start to see those connections, those underlying patterns, it can be really powerful, not just in coding, but in like anything.
So you're saying the next time I'm facing down some huge, hairy task, I should just channel my inner composite pattern, break it down into a nice, neat tree structure.
Hey, it's worth a shot, right? Remember, complexity. Often it's just hiding some underlying elegance. And when we can find that elegance, unlock those patterns, that's when we can really start to create amazing things.
That's a great takeaway. It's not just about the code itself. It's about learning to think in a way that reflects the elegance of, like, well-designed systems.
And I said it better myself.
It's about finding those fundamental building blocks and then using them to build something truly remarkable. Well, on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into the composite design pattern. We hope you've enjoyed this little exploration of, elegant code structures and really the broader principles that they can teach us.
And who knows, maybe you'll start seeing the composite pattern everywhere you look.
Until next time, happy coding, everyone.